Okay, folks. Don't really have a Godzilla hat. Could have worn something green, I guess. I don't know if I even have anything green to wear these days, which of course makes me a complete bummer on St. Patrick's Day. But in any case, I went and watched a half ton of. Well, it wasn't really that many movies. It was quite a few Godzilla movies. So Clamp 20XX is asking which movies did I watch. I will get into that. I watched about let me think how many movies I watched. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight Godzilla movies in total, including the latest the Kong of Skull Island movie, which is included in the whole batch of recent Godzilla movies, starting with the 2014 Godzilla. So I wanted to talk about the Godzilla movies because I remember long, long ago, way back in the long ago, of course, I watched all of these Godzilla movies. Not all of them, because there was at least one movie I watched that I had not seen. The Godzilla movies I mainly remember are the original one, or at least what I thought was the original one, featuring Raymond Burr. And then Godzilla 1985 was one that I watched probably over and over again. And I guess it's a good thing because, it makes no difference now because I only remember like a couple moments of that movie, and it's an impossible movie to get online. You can't find that movie streaming online. You would have to go and find a cassette tape of something, or I don't know if it's out on DVD or whatnot, but you can't find that movie. So that was one of the Godzilla movies that I remember fondly. I once tricked myself into thinking it was Godzilla 2000, and I watched that, and I think that was a piece of garbage movie. So, but back in the day, I remember, they had Mothra, they had Rodan, they had, what else did they have? They had the son of Godzilla and that dorky little kid suit. And they had just a few monster movies here and there. They had King Kong versus Godzilla, of course. Andrew Rowland, I'm on the minority here, but I love Godzilla as his own character, especially the animated series. I never saw the animated series. Now, I wonder if that was the one that was after the Matthew Broderick movie, because I think that one might have gotten a little bit of popularity there, or else maybe it was, one of the real later ones. I got into Clamp 20XX says I got into Godzilla during COVID, became a huge fan after going through several of them. Andrew Rowland said Zilla is the 98 Godzilla that got renamed. Okay. Oh, Zilla is the 98 Godzilla that got renamed. Okay. That must have been the post Matthew Broderick one then, I guess. Because I remember there being one because of spoiler alert, at the end of that movie, there's like a Godzilla egg that hatches, and I think it's that Godzilla that then becomes the Godzilla animated series feature star at that point. Although I never really watched that show. So anyway, what did I see? Okay, so the first movie I saw was the original Japanese movie, the original Japanese Godzilla movie. And what's interesting about that, I found out, was that I'd never seen it before. And the reason I'd never seen it before is because here in the United States, they did an American adaptation of the Japanese movie in which they cut the movie into pieces and re-edited it together. And then they, what was Andrew saying here? Toho took the rights to the 98 Godzilla and renamed him as Zilla because they felt that version took the god out of Godzilla. Clamp 20 XX 1954 classic. Yes. The very first Godzilla movie was cut up, and Raymond Burr, who most people famously remember as Perry Mason, he was brought in as American reporter Steve Martin, who, of course, this was back in the years before the Steve Martin we all know. So he was brought in as the character Steve Martin, and Steve Martin was an American reporter who was in Japan at the time of the Godzilla attacks. And when the movie opens, when that adaptation opens, we see Steve Martin buried in the rubble of the Godzilla attack, and then everything from there on is a building up to revealing Godzilla, and then the Godzilla attacks, and then finally when Godzilla is destroyed, etc., etc. And I don't remember exactly if the Godzilla destruction that occurs in there is as conclusive as it was in the 1954 original Godzilla movie, because it both featured what was called the oxygen destroyer. That was a famous piece of trivia. If you were ever doing Trivial Pursuit or anything, or one of those trivia games, that one of the things that they would always say is, in the original Godzilla movie, what was used to take out Godzilla? And the answer was oxygen destroyer. uh, Andrew Rowland. Now, the real question, Godzilla 1954 versus Godzilla minus one, which do you prefer? I have not seen Godzilla minus one, so don't spoil anything about that. I have not seen that movie yet. Let's see. Usually I would say Toho series is let's see. Clamp 20XX says, I think we'll find out soon. Backy Xavierist says, usually I would say Toho Godzilla series is the original MCU if the MCU lasted longer. There are quite a few movies in that batch. I want to say there were a good 10 or 20 movies, but if you look at it about that far, the MCU did last longer. Maybe not in terms of years, but it lasted longer in terms of films, I think. I think there were more Marvel movies than there were Godzilla movies from back in the day. I could be wrong about that, but I don't remember seeing more than like a dozen of the actual, because what HBO or Max has on it now is a set of Godzilla movies, not all of them, but a set of Godzilla movies under a particular imprint, some sort of particular collection. And I saw like a couple under that collection, and then the rest of them I passed by because there were just too many. You can go on Wikipedia and you can get a list of Godzilla movies. You'll be able to see everything that was in that particular universe. Clamp 20XX says, what spurred you on to watch through these movies? Just the cultural zeitgeist or other factors? Actually, it was because Godzilla King of the Monsters is my favorite of the movies from the most recent cycle of Godzilla movies. And it was playing on Max. And I wanted to make sure I saw it before my Max subscription expired. I'm going to be canceling Max because I got Max on a trial subscription that was like, it was a Cyber Friday, Cyber Monday type thing where you could get Max for $2.99 a month for 6 months. And so the price is gonna hike to $9.99 a month at the end of the trial period. That trial period ends on May 22nd. And so when I looked at that, when I looked at my Godzilla list, I was like, oh, well, I didn't realize they had like all the Godzilla stuff on Max. So I may as well go ahead and watch as many Godzilla movies as I care to watch before I have to cancel this. So that was really the spurs. I wanted to see Godzilla King of the Monsters, and then I thought, well, I may as well just go through since Max has all of these. I'll just go through as many as I can. So I actually started with the 1998 Godzilla movie that starred Matthew Broderick. That was the first one that I watched, but I already started talking about the Japanese one, so I'll continue with that one. Let's see. KOTM was King of the Monsters was a great Godzilla movie that gives you the feel of a Showa and there's something in the way of that little heart thing gets in the way of the chat. Was a great Godzilla movie that gives you the feel of a Showa Hessel films, very WWE with kaiju's feel. Yeah, and one of the things I liked about that I remember, I think I rented that DVD and I was able to see the director's commentary on it. And one of the things that he brought to the series was the idea of this giant floating platform called the Argo, which was kind of like a shield helicarrier, but it was more in the shape of a bat wing. And he said, we wanted to get humans into the fight. And the way to do that was to create this giant floating fortress called the Argo, which, I'm looking at that thing thinking, does that thing ever land? I would hate to see the runway needed in order to let that thing land. Uh, so so in the original Godzilla movie, I realized that I had never seen that because I had always seen the American adaptation. And the American adaptation had Raymond Burr as reporter Steve Martin, and he is the one primarily reporting on what is going on in Godzilla. And they cut the movie and they reshoot some scenes from the movie with actors that kind of resemble him, that they kind of film from behind to make it look like Raymond Burr is talking with them. And they kind of weave him into the story that way. They also give him like a Japanese military attaché who takes him around and shows him all the stuff. And he is the lens through which we wind up seeing Godzilla in all of his destructive glory. And the problem with that is that you miss out on the Japanese perspective, because what I realized when I was watching Godzilla, the Japanese version, for the first time with subtitles, that everything in the Japanese consciousness at that point was like, we had this terrible thing, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened to us. There's actually a character in the movie who says, and she's just a support. She's not even a supporting character. She's just like one of the people in the movie who's on a train when Godzilla comes down and through a rampage, and she actually mentions, God, I've survived I managed to escape the bombing at Nagasaki. Just and now this happens. And it was really chilling to realize that when Godzilla was made, the atomic bomb droppings from America onto Japan were within living memory. I mean, everybody, there were probably people who saw the mushroom clouds off in the distance, who were alive when Godzilla was filmed. I mean, it's just staggering to think of that only 9 years prior had they experienced atomic war. Had they experienced the force of the A bomb that, well, it was the H bombs that would later be developed that would be tested out in the Pacific Islands, that were responsible for waking Godzilla up. The idea in the Japanese movie is that these giant creatures might be living in the Earth's crust down in the ocean floor, and the H bomb testing woke them up, and that is why Godzilla is now rampaging in Japan. And now in the minds of the Japanese who are in the movie, the question becomes, how do we destroy this thing that was unleashed by our terrible weapons? And the answer to that becomes this oxygen destroyer, which is an even more terrible weapon. If you let this thing loose, then for like, I don't know, a mile around or something in the water, it's going to kill off all the aquatic life, including Godzilla. And that's a terrible power to have. And the Japanese scientist who developed it is thinking to himself, he's wrestling with the fact that I've got this weapon that is even more terrible than an H bomb. And if I give this over into human hands, where it can be developed to destroy Godzilla, and I mean, it can already destroy Godzilla, but to be used as a weapon against humanity, this could be the end of us all. And so Godzilla winds up being not even the most powerful threat in the movie. And that's pretty amazing when you think about that, because in the American adaptation, Godzilla is really portrayed as the ultimate threat, and we'll just do anything we have to in order to destroy it. But this guy who creates the oxygen destroyer, he's really, really wrestling with himself, trying to figure out, okay, do I unleash this new horror on the world that could possibly affect all of mankind, or do I decide, or do I just basically, let Godzilla have his way? Let's see. What do we got? Andrew Rowland, my only disappointment in the Legendary movies is Mechagodzilla, both in design and how it was used. And that was in the movie Godzilla versus Kong. Um, Clamp20XX says, I have many issues with with King of the Monsters, mainly the humans and the story itself. Monster fights are cool, but there wasn't enough personality in the filmmaking to save it for me. I love the 54 films, really spooky stuff. Yeah, and the problem is that for me, I mean, I've grown past the point of being able to stomach the rubber suit action, unfortunately. So the special effects were really not doing it for me. Um, Back Xaverist says, wrong. I think it's perfectly fine. Godzilla in King of the Monsters is like a Cuban crocodile. Clamp20XX says, yeah, the context of the film given Japanese history is horrifying. Yeah, that was the thing that made Godzilla, the original movie, so interesting to me to see, was to realize that this was a people who had experienced this kind of terror before, and the Godzilla monster was just kind of another form of that terror. It was unleashed by atomic weapons, but it may as well have been an atomic weapon that they themselves had unleashed, depending on who it was who was doing the H bomb testing. I mean, I don't know if the Japanese had their own H bomb stuff at the time, but as far as the Americans and Russians and whatever who were doing their tests around there, it's like, well, here we go again. All of a sudden, we've got this rampaging monster with that's burning cities to the ground, and it's just like having the A bombs dropped on us again. Andrew Rowland, Godzilla is technically an American-made monster. It just happens to attack Tokyo. Doesn't he destroy his own research before he goes to use the oxygen destroyer on Godzilla? Yes, in both the Japanese and the American adaptations, the scientist decides to not only um, uh, destroy all of his research, but also, of course, kill himself at the end by unleashing the oxygen destroyer and being consumed by it along with Godzilla. Now, the really interesting thing that happens at the end is I think you actually see Godzilla's skeleton, because this thing just basically dissolves all flesh. And Godzilla's skeleton is actually shown sinking into the ocean. So Godzilla is flat ass dead at the end of the Japanese movie. I don't know if he's shown to be conclusively dead in that same way at the end of the American adaptation. I don't think he is. I think the implication there is they didn't want to have to explain why it is that Godzilla is somehow still alive. And so they just basically showed Godzilla being hurt by the oxygen destroyer in the American adaptation and sinking into the water, but they don't show his bones. And so, but in the Japanese version, they actually show him just being completely defleshed, skeletonized, whatever. And the that raises the question: how the hell do you have more Godzilla movies after that? Because the next movie in the series was one called Godzilla Raids Again, and so I decided to watch that because I wanted to see what it was that their explanation was for the reappearance of Godzilla after he had been so conclusively killed. And the answer was simply that there's more than one Godzilla. There's a whole species of those creatures, and it just happens that this is the second of those species to make an appearance. Yeah, exactly. Andrew Rowland says in Godzilla Raids Again, they explain that it's another Godzilla. Yeah, that's all it is. There is kind of that loss of connection with the first one. Then it's kind of like when there is an issue of the Avengers where Captain America's shield is actually destroyed, and you have to go back and retcon it to basically say, well, that was just kind of a fake shield or a replica shield that he was using at the time. But back in the old days, they didn't really attach any particular significance to Captain America's shield. It was just a shield that he had been made for his costume and all that. And this circular shield got vaporized by a laser in one of these Avengers books, and then later on you see him with another shield, and you just realize, well, it's another shield. So the whole adamantium or vibranium steel mix kind of thing that they did, which I thought for the longest time that Captain America's shield was an adamantium vibranium mix. And later on, I think it was Kurt Busiek who retconned that and said, no, it was a steel vibranium mix. And I don't know why. let's see. Andrew Rowland says, and the legendary lore explains that Godzillas have existed for millions of years, but are now nearly extinct with only one left. Yeah, and the same is true of Kong. Um, so I watched Godzilla Raids again, and it was okay. There was some, Godzilla based destruction. You had a few supporting characters and a couple of tragic deaths, um, and then Godzilla just gets buried in ice basically at the end of the thing when the fighter jets shoot these mountains and cause a whole bunch of avalanches to go and bury him. How Godzilla kills Angrius is kind of brutal. I don't know what that's from, so don't. Uh, I didn't watch that one. I don't think. Oh, it was that Angrius. Angrius was the Godzilla raids again. There was a second monster in there, and yeah, Godzilla defeats that monster. I don't really remember how that was done, but that's okay. Oh, I'm probably being too spoilery as it is for most of these movies. Now, the at that point, I watched the American remake, and I was not as impressed with the American remake. Mainly just because it kind of just puts everything into that stark thing of man versus or military versus Godzilla, and that's basically all it winds up being. Um, and the first movie I actually watched out of all of the Godzilla movies was the Matthew Broderick one from 1998, and I loved that movie back in the day, and it actually holds up really well even today. Even today, that is a really decent Godzilla movie. You've got Matthew Broderick, you got Hank Azaria is in there. You've got Jean Reno. I'm trying to remember the name of the poor girl who I think that was like her one leading role ever. I can't remember her name. But she, all four of those cast members do a wonderful job. And the thing about that particular Godzilla was, let's see, Andrew Rowland says, I love Zilla's design. I know hardcore Godzilla fans hate it, but they love the Zilla animated series. Yeah, the thing I loved about Godzilla is that he was so mobile. The Godzilla that we've seen before, and they've kind of increased his mobility in the Legendary series, is that he has gotten is that in the 1998 series or the 1998 movie, he could actually run through the streets. And I remember just sitting there in the theater thinking, Godzilla is running. I can't believe I'm seeing this. Godzilla is running. And it was amazing. One thing that they did not do is they did not give him atomic fire breath. Instead, his breath, I guess, contained like gases that would ignite if they were exposed to fire. So there are a couple of scenes where he appears to breathe fire, and it's really just his exhalation catches fire from something else that's in the destruction around him. Walter Howard said the 90s Godzilla is a decent movie, but a bad Godzilla movie. I didn't find it to be that bad. I did find it a little bit reminiscent of Jurassic Park, which had already come out by that time, especially when you had the baby Godzillas hatching. And it was a movie that was played up for laughs more than it was played up for all of the destruction. But I think it kept a good balance between the humor and the destruction porn that we were expecting. Um, so I watched that, and I was pleased with that. I think I tried to see whether the Godzilla animated series was online, but I couldn't find it on HBO at least. Um, I never saw that one. I never watched that back in the day. So I jumped ahead instead to the 2014 Legendary series, and that's where we have our present series of movies, which started with Godzilla, and then you had Kong of Skull Island, and then Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla versus Kong, and now you've got in the movie theaters, I think right now is Godzilla X Kong, or Godzilla X Kong New Kingdom, which I have no interest in seeing at the moment. I just can't pay to go to the theaters anymore. So I watched those four movies, That is 4 movies, right? Yeah. Let's see. Andrew Rowland says you can't find the animated series anywhere. You can find it on YouTube on some sites that pirate animated shows. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna pass on that. Or maybe I won't. I don't know. I'll have to make a note to myself to at least try looking it up. There are some shows out there that really need to get recapitulated into DVD sets. I mean, there was the American version of Touching Evil on USA that had Jeffrey Donovan and Vera Farmiga, who was in Godzilla King of the Monsters, and also young Bradley Cooper was a supporting character in there. And excellent show that for some reason they've just never collected into a series. So I don't know what the problem is there. I really hate it when they don't take these. I can't even find it on YouTube. I can't even find it anywhere. And it was really one of the best shows they ever came out with. I think I still have like a videotaped episode here or there of it, and I'm loath to keep it. At the same time, I'm loath to erase those tapes because it's like that's probably the last of that that's in existence. Um, so anyway, yeah, as far as the Godzilla animated series stuff, well, maybe I'll see if it's available on YouTube. But oh, the Legendary series. I was really not impressed by the 2014 Godzilla. I was really disappointed by that movie. And I honestly think to this day that the scenes with Bryan Cranston and Juliette Binoche were probably the best scenes in the movie. It was just not a well done movie. There was not there was too much conflict between man and I guess what it was that I was expecting was that with this Godzilla movie, I wanted to see Godzilla as the main antagonist, and instead they have these two other creatures, the Mutos. I'm not even going to try and remember what that stands for, but those Mutos, the male and the female, who are going to like create a whole big generation of these Muto creatures, they are the antagonists. They are the ones who are responsible for the death of a character at the beginning of the film that kind of sets things in motion. I just didn't feel like this movie was worth my time. And one of the things that really bothered me was how dark it was shot. When I was watching it on my TV, I mean, sometimes I run into movies like this where I cannot see a damn thing on the TV because it's just so dark. And I don't know whether it's my TV or if it was just shot that way. I remember it in the theater; it was still that dark. Um, and Run the Point Night saying, I can't imagine any Godzilla movie being better than -1. Yeah, which I have not seen yet. I'm waiting for that one. That is one I would like to see. And I'm watching this Godzilla movie and thinking to myself, okay, first of all, they the Godzilla that they brought back was the kind of chubby Godzilla. I mean, I almost called him the Peter Griffin Godzilla because he just looked so fat compared to his more lithe form in the 1998 movie. I was, he's got those stubby legs going, and I didn't care for that look. I also didn't care for the fact that they hid him for most of the movies. For most of the movie, they didn't play up his presence. They showed him like on TV. They showed like snippets of him. They showed his foot coming down, or just this or that section of Godzilla, and they didn't really show him in all his glory. There were scenes like the one scene, and this was really awesome when I saw it on the trailer in the movies, because when you had it up on the trailer, you had the thing where you had a whole bunch of guys who were on the plane, and they all jump out because they're making a halo jump, a high altitude, low opening jump, and they're all falling, and you see the sky is red, and you're wondering what the hell's going on, because this is just the trailer. We haven't seen, any word of the movie yet. And they're going down and going down and going down, and then they pass through the clouds, and then you can see like the whole freaking city is destroyed. The city's like on fire and shit. And you're looking at that like, what is going on? And then as they're going down further, there's lightning that flashes, and as the lightning flashes, it's illuminating the fact that there are these monsters fighting in the background, and you can see one of them is Godzilla. And then it's like, oh, okay, look who's making a comeback. That was really, really entertaining in the theater, but not so much when it was on the movie, because you just couldn't see a damn thing. Um, so anyway, you get through that Godzilla, and there's all the whole thing about Godzilla's there for balance, and he's a part of nature, and blah blah blah. And I don't know, I didn't find all the not necessarily environmental themes, but all of the kind of just yin yang kind of stuff was a little bit on the boring side. And then I think the next movie that came out was Kong of Skull Island. And the reason I say that is because Kong was featured actually pretty heavily in Godzilla King of the Monsters in the background kind of stuff. Let's see. Walter Howard, the legendary Godzilla movie are really Gamera movies in disguise. Yeah, I don't really get the reference. The Kong of Skull Island was a prequel type movie, and it was set in 1977 toward the end of the Vietnam War. Samuel L. Jackson plays a soldier who is disgusted with the fact that, they pretty much lost the war, and now they've got to go back to the States, and he's got no more missions to do. And now somebody calls him in saying, hey, I've got one more mission for you. Can you just take these scientists over to this Skull Island place, let them do some seismic readings, and then come back? And he's just happy to have a job still. Tom Hiddleston plays a former special SAS agent from British services, who is hired to keep them alive in jungle territory, etc. And there's also John C. Reilly as a American pilot from World War II, who crash lands on the island back in the 40s, and has been living on the island all that time. So you've got all these characters that wind up pretty much crash landing on the island, and they have to get away. Because you've got Kong there, and you've got all these other animals there that are pretty much out to kill him, especially the skull crunchers, skull faced things. I don't remember exactly what the terminology for those was, but Kong has been protecting the human population who lives on the island from the skull faced creatures. And then Samuel L. Jackson is pissed at Kong because Kong causes the death of a good portion of his men, and that sets up an enmity between him and Kong that it takes over his reason. So that was actually the second best, I want to say, of the Legendary series. The second best of the movies, I would say, would be Kong of Skull Island. That one, I think, was the most entertaining. You enjoyed the characters the most. It wasn't a great movie, but it was good enough, and it was one that introduced Kong in his now super humongous size. I mean, you remember how there's one of the things that is so different now between the 1933, 1978, even the more recent Peter Jackson version of King Kong, is that Kong was only about 10 stories tall, if that, maybe about 2 or 3 stories tall. He wasn't more than 10 stories tall, and now he's like 30 stories tall, because he has to be in order to match up against Godzilla. And that's pretty amazing to see a giant monkey that size, where there's no way this guy's climbing up on top of the Empire State Building or on top of the World Trade Center. I mean, those buildings are just coming down under those weight. Although in Godzilla versus Kong, he does kind of do a rampage through Tokyo where he's like jumping from building to building. I'm just like, man, those buildings are not structurally safe now. Ooh boy. Let's see. Andrew Rowland says, I heard Toho put a lot of restrictions on Godzilla for their movies, most notably his lack of emotions. Yeah, and his that is something that does come across pretty fiercely. Is that Godzilla does not emote. Uh, you don't get a lot of personality out of Godzilla. Did you know that the second tallest Godzilla is the Hanna Barbera Godzilla? No, I didn't. I wonder how the Marvel Godzilla stacks up. Um, so Kong of Skull Island, I thought was a good movie. Then after that came Godzilla King of the Monsters, and I thought that was the best movie of the Legendary series by far. Mainly because you had a whole series of monsters to go through, but also because they had stepped up the graphics where you could see most everything that was going on. I mean, there were still times when it got confusing to watch because you're dealing with these creatures of ginormous scale. And sometimes you're looking at these things like, I don't know where my eyes are supposed to be at any given moment to see what's going on. But uh, but by far the most interesting and the most human involved because of the cast, because of the interrelationships of the cast, because of the villains' motivations and who turns out to be villainous. Um, you got the guy from Game of Thrones who's playing Tywin Lannister, and it's just like you don't need another villain when you got him, but it turns out there is another one. Um, all of that made it a really good movie of conflicting priorities, conflicting motives, um, some surprises in terms of the technology of the monster summoning. How is it? How did she create the signal and all this kind of stuff? Uh, that is by far my favorite among the movies. And then you've got Godzilla versus Kong. Let's go back over to Andrew Rowland. Godzilla is crossing over with Power Rangers in the comics, and they put the Dragon Zord onto Godzilla, and I orgasm. um, I was never a Power Rangers fan, so I did not don't really follow along with that. Um, Godzilla versus Kong, it's okay. It's definitely not my favorite among them, and largely because I feel like they had to bring back too many characters to make it a whole movie. You've got Millie Bobby Brown from the Godzilla King of the Monsters, and Kyle Chandler as her father, and I felt like the whole subplot with what's his name, Brian Tyree Henry. Am I saying his name right? He was in Eternals later, and he's in there as well. And they've got a subplot with her and him and one other guy. And I every time that particular subplot was going, I was just like, "Oh God, can we please move back on to the other stuff?" So they had a whole sub thread running through there that I really wasn't that impressed with and felt like could probably go. Um, But other than that, I mean, as far as the fights between Godzilla and Kong went, you always have this problem that neither of them is going to get killed, and that's kind of like the same thing with Superman versus Batman. It's like neither of them fighting each other is going to get killed because what would be the fun in that? Plus, they're going to be showing up in sequels and stuff. Let's see. Walter Howard said, "I didn't care for the art in Power Ranger versus Godzilla. He was great in Batman versus Batman Ninja Turtles, but I didn't care for his take on the Zords or Godzilla." Andrew Rowland says, "Kong is slowly becoming the main character in the Legendary movies, and this upsets me because it should be Godzilla. But pointing back at my comment about the restrictions, it's no wonder, and that's the restrictions on Godzilla being, kind of emotive in his personality." Yeah, I mean, I'm not like huge on either of the characters at this point. I mean, it's nice to see a good rollicking monster movie, monster fights once in a while, but with the exception of Godzilla King of the Monsters and Kong of Skull Island, you don't really get a lot of decent I guess, humanity in the movies, to the point where you can really feel for all the people coming from all the sides. And that of course, I always feel like when I'm talking about anime and such, one of the great things about anime and Japanese products in general is the feeling that you start to emotionally identify with characters on both sides of a conflict, and then you bring those characters together in conflict, and it's just gut wrenching from that point forward, because you don't want anything to happen to these characters. And with the monsters, where you know that really nothing can happen to these characters, there's a lot of there's a lot of false tension that they wind up having to build on. And I don't know what they would have to do in order to solve that problem. I mean, maybe make movies that are more like Pacific Rim, where you really don't know what's going to happen to any of these characters. Pacific Rim is probably the best kaiju movie possibly that's ever been made. I mean, I really like that movie. I was really surprised at how good that movie turned out. I mean, it's one where if you want to go see a movie that's really predominantly about, human extinction and the possibility of the apocalypse, um, in conjunction with these kind of kaiju type creatures, that's the movie for you. I mean, I don't think the Godzilla movies really measure up in that respect. Now, the Pacific Rim sequel, screw that. I mean, that was just garbage. Uh, Walter Howard says, I think it really is difficult to have good human characters in the monster versus monster type Godzilla movies. And Run the Point says, Skull Island was great. I think Sam's line was, we didn't lose the war, we withdrew. Yeah. uh, yeah, he was kind of fun in that movie, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, that's pretty much all I got to say about those. I'm not like off in any rush to see the Godzilla new king or Godzilla and Kong New Kingdom movie that's out in theaters now. I would like to see Godzilla minus one when it finally comes to either Redbox or Netflix or whatever streaming service it's going to hit next. I'll probably go and check online to see if I can find that Godzilla animated series, just to see if there's anything worth watching in that. Um, Beyond that, I think I'm pretty tapped out of Godzilla related material. So, anyway, let's see. Andrew Rowland says Legendary needs to make their version of Jet Jaguar and make it like a Pacific Rim mecha. Man, I mean, all these references that I don't get. Walter Howard says minus one is a masterpiece. So, hearing a lot of good things about it. I knew it was out in theaters, but I didn't catch it when I had the chance. So I'm just gonna wait until it hits the big screen event or the small screen eventually. Um, and other than that, I think I will let y'all go. So thanks again for stopping by, and let me check the live chat thing for a second, because I didn't realize that I had it on. I did not realize I had it on live chat rather than top chat, but I think we had enough on here that I didn't miss anybody. Okay, there we go. I got to remember to do that in the future, is just make sure it's on live chat rather than top chat. I wish they had a default setting for that. Okay, anyway, thanks for watching, and have a happy Monday, y'all. God, that time again. And I will talk to y'all later.